David, it's Friday, and that means we're saying hello to everyone who's present here for our public show. This is, of course, reverse engineering crime scene investigation, and what we've taken to doing is these YouTube videos that are available to everyone at no charge, but of course you and I are both very active on patreon.com. So I like to begin these sessions by reminding everyone that I simply couldn't do this show without you, David, and it's very important for our viewers to be sponsoring the effort. They can do that by going to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. That's David's page. And of course, people can also sponsor Crowdsource the Truth by going to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. How are you today, David?
I'm very well, Jason, and I think this is quite a exciting voyage of discovery, and I just want to emphasize that word. Discovery is a term, as I understand it, used specifically in civil claims for damages.
Indeed.
And instead of going through the criminal courts, I keep emphasizing with these ultra-sophisticated crimes, where it would appear that the guilty mind has been substituted or replaced with what they call expert system artificial intelligence or fuzzy logic algorithms, we're never going to find mens rea or the guilty mind in these crimes, in which case you can't take the people you'd like to take into court and accuse them of murder one or murder for hire and get any chance of a conviction. So the only remedy, and I think you and I are developing a unique solution to that, is discovery, and discovery allows you to ask people, for example, Joanne Isham, who was, I believe, the founder of the National Imaging and Mapping Agency on the 1st of October of 1996. If you look at that operation, the acronym obviously was NEMA, it said it sort of tightened up its activities after 9/11. Well, from the point of view of discovery, I would love you to ask Joanne Isham what the hell she was doing on 9/11 with the National Imaging and Mapping Agency, because in my opinion she'd have all of the resources to establish a bird's eye view on what essentially was a battlefield where the survival of the Republic was at stake in New York and Washington. Over to you.
You know, David, one of the most fascinating things about this process that you and I have engaged on here, it ties into everything else that I'm doing with Crowdsource the Truth. You know, there are a lot of people watching who I think really appreciate what's going on, and then there are others who it's hard for me to tell if they're provocateurs or if they're legitimate people who are just frustrated. There's someone who's taken to contacting me recently to try to discredit one of my guests, and I won't say who it is, but this person is using a fake account, or I should say an anonymous Twitter account that could just as easily be fake as it could be authentic. They've presented no verifiable information, and they've refused to speak to me on the phone, but yet they're adamant that one of my regular guests is lying. So, I mean, they seem to fit the model of this social media protection appliance, or someone who would be utilizing that to try to insert doubt and try to discredit people. So it's very interesting for me. I'm not CNN, I'm not the New York Times. You know, I can't verify everything that every guest who comes on the show says, and that's not to say that I'm deliberately putting out misstatements. Obviously, when someone says something that I find implausible or unlikely, I question them. But in the case where someone feels that something's been said that's incorrect or untrue, the process that we're engaged in here, this crowdsource investigation, as you've called it, cloud-centric crime scene investigation, it calls on the members of the viewing public who see that we've said or done something incorrect to bring that to our attention in the form of evidence. And mere statements, particularly when they're made by anonymous entities on the internet, that doesn't constitute evidence.
No, you're absolutely right. And there's the Sherlock Holmes mandate, if you will, who says that we should always start with the data, all right, before developing the theory, because otherwise there's a tendency to adjust the data to fit the theory because you've attached your ego to it, right? So there's lots of people out there, and I meet them and hear about them every day, that would like me to I don't know, look at the Jews, look at Mossad, look at the Crown, look at the Queen, etc., etc. And I think I'm fairly polite with these people. But what they seem to want me to do is get my theory to fit their facts, or, you know, the other way around. So, you know, just let me give you an illustration, and we can come on to the John Benet Ramsey and the Unabomber thing in a minute. A clear example of an intent to get the public theory manipulated to fit and avoid certain inconvenient facts, right, would be that image outside the Pentagon. It's a little video clip. I'm sure you can pull that up, of people in line abreast, and they're moving across the Pentagon lawn, and they're picking up evidence from the Pentagon lawn, which is a crime scene. Now, what they would prefer you to think is it's a terrorist scene, but basically it's a crime scene. And those people, whether they know it or not, are committing a felony, right? They're removing evidence from a crime scene, which should have had, except for the pre-positioning, a yellow tape around the entire thing, and nothing should have moved in and out of the Pentagon lawn without the approval of the authorities. So it's actually a video clip. I don't know if you can...
I'm looking for it while you continue to speak. I just found this right away.
So I think if you look under YouTube, debris removal from the Pentagon lawn. Okay. And so it looks like it's a drone or a picture from a nearby hotel looking down on the Pentagon lawn. And there's about, I would say, 20 people at a guess, line abreast. I can't quite make out their uniforms, but I have reason to believe, because there's other images around the Pentagon at that time, that they're FBI uniforms. Now, I don't know, presumably if you can go to Walmart and get some FBI T-shirts, but it looks like these guys were equipped with FBI. What?
I think you can, yeah. Someone gifted me an FBI T-shirt so I could put it on and go to the Pentagon.
Exactly. Now, this group of people moving across the Pentagon lawn were there, I would say, 10 minutes after impact, and they're removing little bits of evidence, you know, not the big stuff. So what's happening there is the felony of spoliation, where they're removing evidence that would have told you what hit the Pentagon, right? And the removal of evidence, or the absence of evidence, is not evidence of absence. But having been removed, there's some very interesting legal remedies for the public at large and the people who are listening, and that's you're entitled to make what's known as an aggressive inference of guilt, right? That is to say, the people removing evidence at a crime scene are guilty in some measure, directly or indirectly, of the crime itself. Well, that's very nice, isn't it? Because that would be the preamble, I think, for you and myself getting into this habit, which I think we're falling into very favorably for the public at large, of discovery of evidence in real time, not in real time at the crime being committed, but actually going into that crime scene, showing that material, and having our listeners look at that, and they can ask themselves a question. And it's what I call, these are the categories of compelling and answered questions. The question has to be answered, because without answering that, you're not going to be able to go down that rabbit hole of who had the equipment or custody of the equipment that executed the attack, if you see what I mean. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting, David. I hope this is the video that you were thinking of. But of course, there's no shortage of evidence that leads us to the conclusion that the FBI is in the regular practice of covering things and removing evidence and altering evidence and influencing witnesses. And it's ironic that you would lead me to that video because, again, the source of this argument with the individual who remains anonymous on Twitter was statements that I made about the FBI pressuring witnesses and kicking in the doors, so to speak, whether that's virtual or actual. We heard in the past week or so that this Clinton Foundation whistleblower with the last name Kane had his door kicked in. We know that Paul Manafort had a unannounced late night raid on his home. These aren't violent criminals who need to be descended upon immediately with guns drawn. These are people who have committed white collar crimes or process crimes like, you know, the dreaded 18 USC 1001. And they could easily be brought into questioning with a knock at the door and being shown a badge. I've spoken before about how years ago I received a business card in my door from federal investigators, and I called them up and went down to one federal plaza and answered their questions, and they determined that someone had stolen my identity. And so the FBI doesn't need to kick in people's doors with guns drawn, but even my mere statement about that drew the ire of this person who seems to want to waste my time with nonsense rather than providing evidence. So I really enjoy what you were doing here on our show, because it seems to be drawing together so many of the other things that I do, like the investigations into lawfare with Brian Vukadinovich, the investigations into the crimes of the Clinton Foundation with Charles Ortel, things that Kevin Shipp has told us about the CIA. Of course, Joanne Isham is a CIA agent, isn't she, David? Or she was?
Well, yeah, she was 25 years with the CIA. She oversaw the investigation into that Aldrich spy case, right? Now, one could argue, apparently, this guy was a really, really serious agent, a double agent, spying for the Russians or whatever, just like Robert Hanssen. Now, I don't know what the FBI thinks it's up to. Anyway, it's a diversion, but one of the things that I would do if I was president of the United States, I'd take the 18 intelligence agencies and collapse them into two, because I don't see how any meaningful intelligence can reach Donald Trump. And I'm not saying that he can't process a lot of intelligence, but whether he can come out with an intelligent answer with 18 people telling him what's going on in the world, I doubt very much, right? So in the case of Joanne Chisholm, what I would like to know what she was doing on the morning of 9/11, because she would have had a key role in looking through the screens, whether they're through virtual war rooms or physical war rooms of the National Imaging and Mapping Agency. And when they say, or if they say, they tightened up after 9/11, what the hell were they doing before 9/11? Right. Because there was a full dress rehearsal for the 9/11 attack on the 1st and 2nd of June of 2001, where a number of these patented devices, and then we can perhaps come on to Lockheed Martin and John Benet Ramsey, were used. For example, previously, you showed a hole at the inner wall of the Pentagon, perfectly circular, probably about, 12 or 14 feet in diameter, with, I'd say, 1.5 tons of debris inside the inner wall of the Pentagon. Now, that means no Boeing civilian aircraft could punch a hole like that. Probably if you stood and they realigned the camera, you could see daylight at the other end. Right? That is to say, it was a bunker buster missile, probably of the type that you can find Lockheed Martin produced. I think they called it a rocket-boosted penetrator bomb, right?
Hardened.
And that's a patent.
Yeah.
A hardened penetrator, right? Now, let's go back to our discovery at a couple of crime scenes. One is the crimes attributed to Theodore Kaczynski, right, who became known as the Unabomber. But before he was arrested and charged and convicted, and we can come to where he was sent later, the FBI had put the name or moniker on this series of attacks of Unabomber, right, because the targets turned out to be universities and airlines. So universities, airlines, bomber. There we are, and we got Ted Kaczynski.
I never knew that was how they got the name.
Yes. So in the mind of the FBI, right, just like with the Amerithrax attack, Amerithrax was the attacks on America with anthrax bacilli put into letters that had been weaponized with sabotage spore powder. So the FBI is very quick to apply a term that is actually quite meaningful, because what that meant, as far as the FBI is concerned, within the FBI, there were people who recognized that whoever it was, and it certainly wasn't Theodore Kaczynski that was targeting America, was targeting universities and airlines. So now, if you look at the Unabomber manifesto, right, that was published, and I believe Theodore Kaczynski or someone told the FBI that I'm going to bomb some more targets unless this is published and this goes up on the air. One of the things that the Unabomber manifesto emphasized is the total decadence and need to destroy industrial society. Well, if you take the objective of of destroying industrial society and comparing that with the initiative of carbon footprint neutralization. Carbon footprint neutralization, if I applied it to you, Jason, would mean your life expectancy is probably very short, because the only way I can save carbon dioxide in respect of you, and for the same is reciprocal, is to stop you spewing out the pollutant known as carbon dioxide at the rate of 40,000 parts per million.
Right.
So little Barry Spatero, or Barack, he's better known as Barack Hussein Obama, when he trots off to Copenhagen for that climate change conference,
Right.
there were people jumping up and down outside dressed in green, saying 350 parts per million, all right? Meaning what they want, or what they think they want, and of course, Barack Hussein Obama, being as dumb as a bag of hammers, seconded it. They would like to reduce the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to 350. Well, that's a problem, because even if you killed every human being and waited about 20, 25 years, it won't drop to 350, because the background carbon dioxide is 380 to 390. Right? So what I'm trying to say here is the attitude towards life, and let me say an example might be little JonBenet Ramsey and her family and marriage and children, is very similar in terms of the treatment of we the people. You know what, in the patents they call it wetware. Did you know that you were described as wetware because of the blood running through your system? You have hardware, software, and wetware.
I've heard that term from a disinformation specialist who seems to have watched quite a bit of your work and my work and gone about the internet trying to confuse people.
Right. Well, anyway, it's just a term. It's a bit like, I guess, Amerithrax and Unabomber. But what I realize with my term reverse CSI storyboards is it may actually be more productive, and I think that's what we're doing, is to reverse engineer the crime scene investigation rather than the crime. And the reason for that is these crime scene investigations are being sabotaged at the highest level in the Department of Justice. So the question is, when you dig into the Department of Justice, where is, let's say, a mens rea or a group of people who might be persuaded that heterosexual marriage and children is going to pollute the earth and we won't be able to survive? So let's get rid of heterosexual marriage. Well, then you find this amazing organization, we've mentioned it before, DOJ Pride, right? Now, DOJ Pride represents the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered interests of the FBI, the United States Marshal Service, Office of Justice Programs, Bureau of Prisons, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, etc. So basically, all of the law enforcement elements within the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I believe now are controlled by people who don't believe that heterosexual marriage is worth supporting, that children should be raised with the values of their parents, etc. So it's basically an organization that really very closely aligned in its interests, I would say, with the Unabomber Manifesto.
Wow.
So now let's go back to 1994, when the British government, in their wisdom, decided they were going to privatize the National Physical Laboratory. And that was the same year that Bill Clinton and Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, decided to privatize the National Visa Center. Now, isn't that extraordinary? You've got the National Visa Center in the United States that's privatized and is still run by Serco. And in the United Kingdom, you have the National Physical Laboratory that spawns an organization officially in 2016, but back in 1994, called the Center for Carbon Measurement. Now, the Center for Carbon Measurement would appear to be measuring the expected generation of carbon dioxide or footprint over the years remaining to the entity. It could be a human being, it could be a Boeing 737. That means to say it would be quite possible to pipe digitally into 4-star and 5-star hotel rooms the amount of carbon by weight that would be saved if you knocked that plane out of the skies. or you kill a little girl like John Benet Ramsey. Nothing personal. What I'm trying to get is the level of gratuitous cruelty visited on little John Benet Ramsey, right, and the Shermans in Toronto, and these other crimes, like the ones at the pig farm, indicates to me there is not a human being with a compassionate soul that's visiting that cruelty. It's been handed off or outsourced to companies that have possessions of the advanced expert system, fuzzy logic, and artificial intelligence algorithms that don't flinch as they kill. Now, it so happens they've run into a problem because I'm being arrogant here, one of the world leaders and pioneers in artificial intelligence and expert system and fuzzy logic algorithms, because I actually built a working system. I wrote a paper in 1981. Seems a hell of a long time ago, and I guess it is.
Yeah.
It was published in 1983 under an analysis of expert thinking. And I built a system for Britoil in Glasgow called HESPER, Heuristic Expert System for the Petrophysical Evaluation of Reservoirs. Sorry about the long words. And HESPER actually could outperform with a informed petrophysicist at the controls, so to speak, a regular petrophysicist by a factor of 10 and
Wow.
get a more accurate result. Now, what I said in my paper and what I've always said consistently right up to the present, perhaps more importantly ever, never let a computer, expert system, artificial intelligence or fuzzy logic algorithm make any decision for you.
Why?
Because it doesn't care. Well, because it doesn't have compassion, it doesn't have a sense of humor, it doesn't have empathy for a victim. So if you program the expert system to say, all right, well, if you can find a plane that would generate, let's say, 500 tons of carbon dioxide saving on a flight from Buenos Aires to Paris, when you're out of a zone of surveillance, right, put it into stall mode and crash it, and then file a claim on the insurance market, which may very well be investors in Serco. So you see my point? The expert system itself doesn't care, just does what it's told. Right? You combine that with the prisoner tracking system, which you're showing. Expert system, including but not limited to fuzzy logic, reinforcement learning, neural networks, artificial intelligence algorithms are executed for determining and analyzing deviated behavior of the prisoner or parole. Well, that's gobbledygook for basically delegating the future of humanity to the dark state, if you will, or the New World Order.
Well,
so actually, go ahead.
Well, what you're reminding me of, David, is that we've heard people like Elon Musk warn us of the dangers of artificial intelligence. So if I understand what you're saying correctly, an expert system that is able to deduce things by having facts and data input into it while it's being programmed to arrive at a conclusion doesn't take morality or any of the human aspects into consideration. It's just looking for a solution to a problem. Elon Musk has described how an artificial intelligence charged with determining the most efficient way to manufacture paper clips might in fact determine that destroying all of humanity could be the most efficient way to manufacture paper clips, but because it doesn't have a sense of morality, it won't exclude the possibility of doing that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Now, so in its wisdom, the United States government, and I'm absolutely convinced this is done under coercion and terror and blackmail and entrapment, has seen fit to outsource the United States Patent and Trademark Office and the Defense Ammunition Center and the National Visa Center to Serco. And I'm saying, what the hell are you guys doing? Right? The the Patent Office, Serco announced on the 15th of November, it had just processed its 4 millionth patent for the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Well, Serco can now cherry pick what network of patents can be clipped together through a process known as systems integration to create a crime scene where the public is looking at a guilty party, like the poor little gas of carbon dioxide. I think I explained to you that the percentage of anthropogenic carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is less than 0.002%. Now, I don't know if you know of anyone or anything that's less than that, but you wouldn't even recognize it was there in the first place. And it's a fertilizer gas, right? So they've demonized carbon dioxide, whether you believe in God or not. That's part of the carbon, oxygen, hydrogen cycle of life. Take it away, and humanity dies. Feed that into an expert system with that kind of spurious logic, and the expert system says, well, maybe I need some access to some chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, or explosive weapons so I can get rid of this scourge on the planet, which is humanity itself. So when Serco was given the custody, the de facto custody of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, you go to an expert system and it says, well, I think we need Serco to get into a partnership with, let's say, Lockheed Martin and Johnson and take over the atomic weapons establishment in the United Kingdom, which manufactures and distributes and disposes and tracks of atomic weapons, for example, for the Trident submarine program. So you now have an expert system, because I believe Serco is effectively, do you call it a bot? Basically, it's the weirdest company you've ever seen. I don't know if you've looked at that little video of the shareholders of Serco, but it includes 3 countries. That is to say, the British, the Saudi Arabian, and the Singaporean government. And if you look at Serco under LGBTE, you'll find that Serco has a total passion for spreading the gospel of DOJ pride, if you will, around the world. So I would say that Serco and the Department of Justice Pride Organization don't put the same values on heterosexual marriage and raising children as perhaps you and I do. Jason, over to you.
Well, it's interesting, David. There are a lot of strange things about Serco, of course, and they definitely control things that I think most people would find quite surprising for a private company to control. And the links to the Radio Corporation of America and prior to that General Electric are quite curious, given what's been happening recently with General Electric and Charles Ortel's research into what General Electric has done in its transition from a manufacturer to essentially a bank of some sort, and how that investigation has led Charles to further investigations of the Clinton Foundation. These all seem like very corrupt organizations. And you know, the other thing along the lines of what I was speaking about earlier, David, how your research is amazingly tying to other things that we've been discussing. I just did a show with Kevin Shipp on Patreon. Kevin and I do a show every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and on Kevin's channel as well. But Kevin was talking about George H.W. Bush and his links to previously classified CIA programs like MK Ultra. Now, I didn't realize until Kevin's expose last night, George H.W. Bush was very involved in the Church Committee hearings. And I know you're aware of the Church Committee hearings. That was an investigation conducted by the Senate into the activities of the CIA and other clandestine agencies of the United States, some of the very agencies that you and I speak about quite regularly. And George Bush was at those hearings sitting right behind William Colby as he made some devastating revelations of some of the secret programs of the CIA. We've all heard about this heart attack gun, and there's even some video testimony online where a woman speaks about the development of the gun. What I did not realize until Kevin's expose caused me to seek out this Chicago Tribune article was that it was part of a program called MK Naomi. And this was a large bacteriological warfare program that I've never heard of before yesterday. Are you familiar with MK Naomi, David?
No, but I am familiar with that they can change their names and do so frequently right across the Federal Bridge. So the extraordinary thing is you often end up chasing shadows, and it comes back to my point about where is the legal remedy for this, because I think our work should always have an offer to our listeners, if I may be so bold, a remedy, right? And what I think I'm saying is they're so sophisticated in their ability to intimidate witnesses that they can remove any evidence that in the normal course of events would lead to a conviction for murder one or murder for hire under racketeering. So the only remedy is to start to understand how the custodians of these patented devices can actually be held responsible in a civil court using the kind of discovery that you and I think we're developing on the fly, probably the first show online. And if I may, maybe I could just look at the Unabomber.
Sure. But before we go there, let me just interject, David. What you've just said is, again, so relevant, because you've told us in show after show how this Federal Bridge Certification Authority is a public-private key infrastructure that allows for these man-in-the-middle attacks and links all of these seemingly disparate entities. Now, you've just said that they are so skilled at intimidating witnesses and so sophisticated in how that can be done. I think it's very interesting because, you know, in our last program we pointed out these 4 seemingly unidentified blobs that lead somewhere, we don't know where, and intimidating witnesses is something that I've observed various social media personalities engaging in. And although, you know, people normally associate clandestine operations, particularly those linked to things like a secret heart attack gun, with simply assassinating people, I think it's possible that those that would do evil in this world realize that if you just kill everybody, I mean, you know, that's not necessarily the most subtle way to achieve your goal. Discrediting people and demonetizing, deplatforming, etc. All of these things are utilized, and I have observed some witness intimidation by someone who is one of the primary adversaries of this program.
Well, and I think that's right. So there are 4 blobs there which are unidentified, but you can imagine you and I have identified again through this, effectively it's an online real-time discovery process. You pointed out when you put this image up, I hadn't seen it before. I'd seen the 2001 image, which had a couple of banks which have now disappeared. The 2 banks that disappeared from the 2001 incarnation of the Federal Bridge was Wells Fargo and Citibank. Now, Citibank provided President Trump with a $380 million loan for his Trump shuttle service, and Wells Fargo was the master server of the leverage lease on the Twin Towers, where 6 weeks before they were blown up through a controlled demolition, they doubled the insurance. So actually the claim that went in was for a double occurrence event, where you know and I know that the expert system that executed the demolition of building number 1 also executed the demolition of building number 2 and the demolition of building number 7. But again, they've taken the mens rea out of the pitch. So let me, if I may, just go over to the Unabomber.
But wait, so one more thing. I'm so sorry, David, because you've brought another piece to this. Big holdings of detained Saudi prince Al-Walid bin Talal are under pressure, and it names Citigroup and Twitter.
Yes.
So that's interesting that Al-Walid bin Talal is linked to Citigroup, which loaned Donald Trump this money. Al-Walid makes no secret of the fact that he dislikes President Donald Trump. Al-Walid dislikes Mohammed bin Salman, who is the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, who is very clearly aligned with Donald Trump. So we start to see some of these connections as we have these conversations, and I know it's slightly frustrating to some people who feel like perhaps I'm a victim of ADD, but these things are all very important and very related.
Jason, that's life. I mean, if you weren't ADD, you wouldn't be able to follow this because there's so many rabbit holes, right, that you've got to follow to a certain extent. You just don't want to linger too long in any one rabbit hole, right?
Right. So let's get to the Unabomber.
Yeah, so the Unabomber. Okay, Theodore Kaczynski was a brilliant man. I think he was a mathematician. Well, I'm a pretty good mathematician. I did perform very well at Cambridge. I got awarded a scholarship for outstanding performance in thermodynamics and applied mathematics. But anyway, that's by the by. So apparently when he was 16 years old, he went to MIT, if I'm right, very, very young, obviously brilliant, but he then entered apparently the MK Ultra program.
Right.
Now, that means in that program, you could be administered any combination of drugs. And one of the things that always intrigues me about Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, she's credited with launching a prisoner medical services program. Well, if you're being serviced by Christine Marcy, who probably founded DOJ Pride in a jail, you're probably not going to spend a very comfortable night, right, in the cell. That is to say, you are totally vulnerable to manipulation by these people, who are, in my opinion, disgusting psychopaths. The point is, Ted Kaczynski, if he went onto that program, I would imagine he would have become a managed agent and a potential patsy for anything that they decided they wanted to point him at, right, and associate him with. Now, let's
stop there for a second, David, and clarify, because it's important. So you're saying Christine Marcy, who is a shadowy figure in the government, who was associated with the JPATS, the U.S. Marshals Prisoner Transport Service, commonly known as ConAir. You have a long-standing theory that this ConAir is used to transport prisoners to and from prison, and that utilizing the artificial intelligence referenced in this Jerome Lemelson patent, where expert systems that include, fuzzy logic, artificial intelligence, etc. These expert systems, this computer, artificial intelligence, is used to upgrade or downgrade prisoner privileges based on their performance. And as a result of it being a computer program and artificial intelligence, it's totally lacking in morality. So if the performance involves garroting a young child and torturing and sodomizing her to death, as long as that achieves the solution that the fuzzy logic artificial intelligence expert system has determined, that's a win for the prisoner.
Yeah, sure. Where the expert system, you said, well, she's a young girl and she's alone, but she's going to be dumping a whole lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere over the rest of her life. So by killing her now, you save a lot of carbon dioxide by weight, right?
But of course, we don't want people to think that you or I believe John Benet Ramsey was selected and killed simply to save carbon dioxide. It was, of course, also done to intimidate her father, who was an important executive at Lockheed Martin. Isn't that right?
Yeah, her father was the chief executive officer of Access Graphics, which was a value-added reseller of Sun Microsystems, which is a very good machine. I use them for the development of my AI system. And he had significant contracts. He had a background, I think, as a Navy pilot at the Pentagon, installing Sun Microsystems workstations. And Access Graphics is a subsidiary, a wholly owned subsidiary at the time, of Lockheed Martin.
Right.
So when that ransom note gets written, they talk about this $118,000. That happens to equal the bonus paid to John Benet Ramsey, I think his Christmas bonus for outstanding performance. And the check, my allegation would be, it would have been cut by Lockheed Martin directors. So I think there was a very specific purpose. I mean, forget about the carbon dioxide for the moment, but there was, I believe, a snuff film made by the psychopaths, possibly on drugs, like lysergic acid amide, what was invented by Eli Lilly back in the 1950s. That elicits characteristic patterns of rage and hallucinations, but someone was on something doing what they did to that little girl, and they tasered her twice, once under the ears and once in the belly. And I believe the film would have been transmitted to the bosses, if you will, of John Benet Ramsey. Now, on the date, that's Christmas Day of 1996, where I think the expert system could very easily have told the group of deviant prisoners or parolees, well, we want you to record images of the death of John Bennett Ramsey at precisely midnight on Christmas night. Now, why? Because I think the precision of these attacks must be truly intimidating to the American targets for extortion, because when you think of an organization that can kill randomly, you don't equate that with precision, right? And precision, to be able, for example, to date and time stamp the attack on the Pentagon in order to trigger a spot fix claim in death pool gambling, it's an extraordinary communication that whatever the forces are out there, and no matter how powerful you think you are as Donald Trump as a president, we can get you, or we can get your family, or we can get your assets at any time. So, for example, on 911, they might have chosen for the second tower, the Trump Tower. And you know what, Jason? I believe Trump knows exactly that he could be a target, and his tower, and his business, and his family at any time. And he's just as likely to be intimidated as the parents and the employers of the parents of little John Benet Ramsey. Now, going up the stack, so at Lockheed Martin, at the time of the little girl's death, Christmas Day of 1996, had a couple of very, very important directors, a vice president by the name of Norman Mineta, and I think whether she was a vice president or not, I don't know. The other is Lynn Cheney. Now, fast forward to 911, just think of the power and potential power or influence over the outcome. Remember Howard Lutnick's patent? Interactive wagering on event outcomes. Well, what happens if the event outcome of 911 had included the demolition of the Capitol building with all of the congressmen and senators inside? There's a vacuum there now. America's been decapitated, right? So where were these characters on Christmas Day of 1996, and where were they on 911? Well, Lynn Cheney was in the Presidential Emergency Operating Center, down below the White House, with Condoleezza Rice, right, and Dick Cheney, the vice president. Yeah, there we are. That's a picture. Now, isn't that an extraordinary photo? Because the commander-in-chief, who should normally have been on the Defense Red Switch network communicating with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the line commanders of the Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Army, he's in a elementary school in Florida, right?
Yeah.
Or he's on his plane, Air Force One, which is getting a message, Angel is next. Dick Cheney...
Yeah, sorry, David, to interject, but that's an important point I wanted to raise as well. It does seem that we've heard about the shock and awe campaign that George W. Bush famously waged against the people of Iraq with, massive bombing from the outset. But it seems like shock and awe are a major psychological component of the way these individuals operate. Certainly for the pilot of Air Force One to receive a phone call in the cockpit on the secure phone, what is surely one of the most secure communication systems in the world, to receive a threat that Angel is next on that phone is extremely shocking, in the same regard that seeing autopsy photos of the death of John Benet Ramsey, garroted and burned by a taser, and all of the horrible things that we've seen in those photos, it's far more chilling than simply learning of the death of a child, which obviously is horrible enough to begin with. But as you said, it's a message to be sent to someone that this is, personally tailored for you. That $118,000 ransom, that number is so specific, it's going to immediately trigger a thought in the guy's head. He's just received $118,000. Here's a ransom note for $118,000. By the way, your daughter is dead. That seems like it would chill you from doing anything other than exactly what the perpetrators of this tell you to do, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. And it does have this overtone of the artificial intelligence and expert system. Now, in that patent that you just described, they use the word, and this is fascinating, deviant behavior, right, of the prisoners and the parolees. So if the behavior of the prisoner or the parolee deviates from whatever they want you to be doing, right, they can either reward you or they can withdraw your privileges. But wouldn't you describe, and again, what they have such control over the language, I could describe the deviant behavior of the members of DOJ Pride in a purely statistical sense. That is to say, from a deviant point of view, they're not like the average Joe or Jill that gets married, has children, conforms to some kind of social norm, etc. But if you have an expert system that's evaluating society in terms of its deviance from deviant sexual behavior, you end up by recognizing, or the expert system recognizes, heterosexual marriage as a thing to be destroyed. Karl Marx, I believe, said abolition of marriage, even the most radical, flare up at this monstrous suggestion of the communists. And that was back in the 1850s, right? When he's squatting around in the reading room in the British Library, drawing up his filthy garbage, which actually has resulted perhaps in the death of 200 million people over the centuries. So basically, I think these kinds of worldviews, like the dystopias, they are driven by a set of rules that renders them perfectly suited for artificial intelligence or expert systems gone rogue, if you see what I mean. Over to you.
Yeah, it's interesting, David. I mean, the other thing I'm observing is the frequency with which I receive Skype calls while you and I are broadcasting. I would have to say that that is a method that's being used to try to disrupt what we're doing. But let's talk for a moment, David. Now, you speak of MK Ultra. There's a lot of people who immediately dismiss that because the CIA has been quite successful in making things like that seem ridiculous. But you know, this is a declassified program that we've heard about, and Ted Kaczynski also was very adamant in his hatred of psychology and psychiatrists and doctors. He wrote about being experimented on with drugs, didn't he?
Yes, I think he did. And people shouldn't dismiss it because, for example, we have a Dr. Ewan Cameron at the Royal Victoria Hotel Hospital, I think that's in Montreal, who in the 50s and 60s conducted many of these experiments. I think by the end of the 60s, he'd recognized it was futile. But futile, I don't think he used that word, but it's a very interesting word because the legacy of what was developed lingers on, and I'm sure was incorporated by Christine Marcy in her prisoner medical services program. So you'd made that earlier point about the ability to deploy prisoners. What I've said is that these are ConAir SWAT teams. Right. You could send a SWAT team. Basically, you've got a database that records everything about people inside the prison and a whole lot of people about people outside the prison. So let's assume they are part of the deviant sexual behavior that's perhaps protected by or lauded by or serenaded by DOJ Pride. So what does a reward or a punishment for a member of the DOJ Pride organization look like? Well, if that translates into telling people in the FBI or the Bureau of Prisons or the United States Marshal Service of the Office of Justice Programs, which does the prisoner tracking, to turn a blind eye to crimes like out at the pig farm or John Benet Ramsey or the explosion set off by Ted Kaczynski and so on, you've actually got a dysfunctional rogue society where the justice system is driven by, dare I say it, artificial intelligence over which we have very little understanding and even less control. Over to you.
Wow. I mean, it's something that we've heard other people talk about. Kevin Shipp has even said that the cloud data services contract that Amazon held for many years, where they were providing cloud data storage for the CIA, Kevin has told us that that's part of a bigger plan to create an all-powerful artificial intelligence that can predict human behavior of everyone. I mean, as we've pointed out many times, this Jerome Lemelson patent, it goes back several years to April 25th of the year 2000. And I mean, you know, that's 20 years ago. That was prior to the widespread use of smartphones, which certainly can be used to track a huge number of people who aren't necessarily incarcerated, But who's to say that fuzzy logic and the various things that are used to monitor each of us can't be used for this same sort of method of upgrading and downgrading privileges? And it's interesting again how all of the points that you're raising, David, tie into things that have been said to us by Bill Binney, by Kevin Shipp, even going back to some of the thoughts posited by Quinn Michaels and various other guests that have been on the show. It's just fascinating to me how these things come together. I mean, this is the purpose of Crowdsource the Truth. It's not that I have the power, the ability, the knowledge to verify or deny anything that anyone comes on the show and says. We're here sharing ideas and offering others the opportunity to confirm or refute those ideas using evidence.
And what's extraordinary is, our respective career patterns. We can bring a spotlight to bear on this, but from you have a background in Hollywood visualization and so on. You're always, very brilliant, I think, at doing those collages. I love that.
Thank you.
But in 1981, I show up as something of a jungle bunny, but with a reasonable brain, at the Ridgefield Schlumberger Doll Research Center in Ridgefield in Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And I was going to go there as the head of development engineering. When I arrived, they just introduced or were talking about the concepts of artificial intelligence. So now I had a background in the field with Schlumberger, where I knew a number of people, extraordinary people, who could look at what are known as logs, petrophysical logs, and do an interpretation in their heads with no computer in the room. And they could say, well, there's oil there and there's an impermeable barrier there, etc. So some of those people I got to know very well in Paris when I was working there. And I arrived, and there was this talk about artificial intelligence, and there were two consultants. There was Marvin Minsky from MIT and Ed Feigenbaum from Stanford, and they both had their representation of intelligence that they were going to try and get on a computer. I looked and listened to both of them in the Schlumberger cafeteria, and I realized neither of these guys had a clue about how real human experts solved the problem, and I thought I did. So in 1981, I wrote a paper. It was published in 1983 about an analysis of expert thinking, and I started building a system at Schlumberger. And now this might be hard to credit, but I believe I've been tracked. And I'm not a paranoid guy, although I think Kissinger said, you're not paranoid if they really are coming for you. But right. If I look at my career, I get the sense that some of my contributions in artificial intelligence have been so powerful, they attracted the attention of some really dangerous people. And some of the things that I developed have been developed for criminal purposes. And let me tell you who I think is involved there at a very high level. So I start my own company, Oilfield Expert Systems in the UK. I built a system that was, I think, runner-up for the British Computer Society Gold Medal Award in 1988. IBM won it, but they basically outspent me. This was the system that I built for Britoil. So that was heuristic expert system for the petrophysical evaluation of reservoirs. That's moving on. So we move into the 1990s, and in 1992, I felt something was preventing me from realizing my dreams, and I pulled out of my own company in the United Kingdom. I came over to Canada. I arrived in British Columbia, and I smelt corruption on a scale I'd never seen anywhere else in the world. I couldn't put my finger at it at the time. But, we're moving into the pig farm disaster and McDonald Detweiler. And then I realized, or I think I realize now in retrospect, the people who were watching me, very sharp, were included a guy called John Deutsch, right, who became the head of the CIA and was fired by Clinton. And I say that, and I'm not joking. To be fired by Clinton, you got to be seriously evil. Now, he was the guy who awarded something or other to Joanne Isham, who would go on to found the National Imaging Mapping NEMA, National Imaging and Mapping Agency, on the 1st of October of 1996. And I think she was incorporating my techniques for handling geographical data with artificial intelligence and expert systems for criminal purposes within the CIA. On the 22nd of October, of 1996. Paradoxically, in the Great Hall of Justice, you have a woman who is probably a lesbian pedophile by the name of Janet Reno, who is the Attorney General, and her colleague, Deputy Attorney General, would be Jamie Gorelick, who's so known as the Mistress of Disaster,
Right.
because it's alleged she put the stovepipes between the CIA and the FBI that prevented the two organizations briefing each other on the Al-Qaeda SWAT teams, if you will, coming through courtesy of Serco at the National Visa Center. I think,
David,
John, go ahead.
Well, there's quite a lot of topics for us to delve into here, but we're just about out of time right now. And I do want to remind everyone that we're going to be back at 3 p.m. Eastern today with the Patreon-only portion of our program. And people can watch that by going to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards. That's David's Patreon page. You can also watch it on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. It's critically important that people sponsor this show and the other shows that are brought to you on Crowdsource the Truth. We've got a viewer-sponsored model to prevent any sort of financial influence over what it is that we report. It occurs to me, David, that doesn't the possibility exist that Bill Clinton would fire a CIA director who was trying to fight criminality? So there's a lot for us to discuss. I would also add that Jason Fazari is letting us know that shock and awe equals Shekinah, and that equals blow your mind. So there seems to be a persistent effort on the part of the CIA to control people's thoughts, either through chemical and psychological means or through by controlling information. And we see that in Operation Mockingbird controlling the news, and what I have observed to be something I've named Operation Mocking Tube, whereby some of the methods that you've described are attempting to control the flow of information in social media and even obstruct what you and I discuss. So David, I'll be very anxious to continue our conversation just 2 hours from now at patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I'll look forward to seeing you there.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Me too. Over to you.
Thanks to everyone watching, and see you in just 2 hours.